Good morning, my name is Dr. Anna Clements with Smart Villages, and I'm going to talk about the Smart Village approach to community engagement and participation, what this translates into in terms of what we do on the ground, and how it works in our current projects that aim to create pilot smart villages. So these are smart villages which take a holistic approach to look at how energy can help with individual, home-based quality of life issues such as lighting in the home, but also community services, healthcare, education, and opportunities for income generation. And my aim through this is to show you how community engagement and participation approaches can be integrated into technical engineering design. So I'm going to talk about one project that we have in Tanzania, which is called Smart Integrated Community Energy in Northern Tanzania. We are working with a partner organisation called AMASI, which is a community organisation that works to improve the lives of marginalised rural Maasai communities in northern Tanzania. The director, Martin Kariongi, has a huge amount of knowledge and experience about the communities in the region and has been at the forefront of many initiatives that work to improve their quality of life. So we are going to be using the Smart Village approach for 4 sites to demonstrate and continue to develop the approach and to gather impact data on its effectiveness. And these 4 sites are by no means identical. They range from a water collection point to a sub-village to a site that includes a secondary school to one that is a more standard village with business centre and surrounding houses. And this slide shows snapshots from each site. In the top left, we have Olmoti Borehole, which is a water collection point for Maasai to come and water their livestock, but also collect water for the domestic use. On the top right, this is the pre-primary school in sub-village Kiruru. It's a small sub-village with just one shop, a pre-primary school and a church, which is starting to look to develop a more business centre in the centre of the village. Below Kiruru, we have the centre of main village, Olaswaki, which has more of a typical business centre with a collection of shops and houses that spread out from that. And at the bottom left, we have Ngeno Secondary School, a secondary school for boys and girls in a sub-village of Muwarak. A short distance from the secondary school is a borehole. So I'm going to discuss 3 key approaches that we have taken in our work together with AMASI. But before I do that, I want to try to contextualize how these key activities fit into the overall Smart Villages approach. So what do we actually do? What activities do we carry out? And how do they interrelate? Here is an indication of the activities we carry out in some shape or form using the Smart Villages approach. And this is not exact for any one project. Each project is different. Things may happen in slightly different orders or have different emphases. But this is a general indication of what our approach involves. The activities in the green boxes happen with community participation, and those in red boxes are activities that are more likely to happen without their direct participation, but with their input. I'm also going to start saying the word community a lot, and what I mean by that really is the end users of the system, people who we are engaging in the co-design process. It may not always be a typical kind of village community, it might also be a school or something else, but I'll use the term community for now. So we start in the top left with discussions with governance bodies and with community groups and individuals in our first discussions and visits. So these are 2-way conversations with any relevant governance bodies, say the village governance, and with other community members, and perhaps also some key individuals. We then do a deeper dive into the needs and priorities of the people to understand their social norms, their practices, and the context in which they're living. And I'll explain about the service value test that we use to do that deep dive in a bit. So both these initial discussions and the service value tests feed back into our conceptual design, early conceptual design of what the system might look like. We go back and discuss the results with the community. And again, this discussion, these responses also feed back into our design thinking. Working from these concepts of what the design of the system might look like, we would have discussions about potential system designs and discussions about finance and governance frameworks with the community. And again, this feeds back into our design thinking. At some point, we move to a more detailed engineering design, sizing and specifying equipment and products that might be used. And this can be iterative as we move between conceptual design and detailed engineering design, and they inform each other. So I put these two together in a loop, and we see the discussions from finance and governance and potential system designs and feedback just with one arrow to make the whole thing a little bit more simple. The really important relationship between the technical design and the design of the governance structure and financial systems is shown in this arrow. You notice this box is grey. And the reason for that is that community might be really involved with this in terms of setting up their own governance structures and managing that whole process themselves, and having a lot of input in the financial system design. Or they might not be, just depending on the context of the project. So linked to the design of governance structure and financial systems are discussions about system placement. This is a really crucial area to work within the community, and again, I'll talk more about this later. Jumping back into the technical, we run focus groups about productive use opportunities that the community might have identified. These are ways that they think they might be able to earn income alongside through the use of electricity, powering different services. And we feed these ideas from these focus groups into workshops that help to generate business plans, get the community members thinking through what they might need to do and what support they might need to make these ideas a reality. All of this again feeds back into what these technical governance and financial systems look like. And much of this whole picture will be iterative. Each discussion won't occur just once. It might be returned to with new information. But I didn't want to put any more arrows on this diagram. So I appreciate that this is a busy diagram, but hopefully what it shows is how system design thinking of the engineering design, governance structures and financial system integrates with community engagement and community participation in that process. So now I'm going to describe a couple of these activities with a bit more detail. The first one is the service value test. We use the service value test to understand community needs and aspirations and the context and integrate this into technical design process and other aspects of the system design. The key is that it's not about asking just about energy, it's about asking about services that are important in order to understand how energy might fit into other services and their lives. So we run the service value test in small groups. Here we see the test run with sub-village Kiraru youth on the left and the Ngeno Secondary School with male students on the right. It includes an exercise where we get quantitative preference data about what services are more important to different community members, and then qualitative data about why those services are important. So step one consists of participants suggesting services that they want to see in their households or in their communities in the future. These are gathered onto a central chart on the top left here. You can see we have a school, improved roads, water, household lighting and security lighting, a salon, health centre, church, a milling machine, and a milk production facility, some examples. In step two, participants make a value-based judgment on these services. They are asked to assign more counters to services that are more important to them and less to those that aren't so important. They do this individually, but we collate the results onto one chart. And as each person has a different counter colour, we can see individual preferences, but also the group preferences. So here for sub-village Kiraru and for one of the focus groups run there, we can see that the majority of counters have been placed onto the school. Other important services are roads, improved healthcare, and the milk production factory. And down here we have water. Now, you can also see that, for example, the person with the yellow counters has put all of their counters onto the school. And this really highlights this result for Kiraru, how important the school is for this community. And it's important because the children currently have to travel about 9 kilometres to get to their primary school. This is really far, and they are at danger of wild animals, and in some cases there have been issues with having to cross rivers in the wet season and children being lost to those rivers. So this community is really prioritising their school. Step 3, the service value test, explores the reasons behind these choices, and this is where those stories come out about why different services are important. So we ask questions like, do you agree with the group results? Why is this service more important than this other one? How would you use it, and how do you access it now? This aims to gather the important contextual information behind their choices and the stories that inform them. So we find that the useful aspects of the service value test are participation. The community starts to participate in the design process really early. They're suggesting and indicating preferences, discussing these amongst themselves and us. It's also an opportunity to ensure an inclusive design process. For example, you can run a focus group and a service value test purely with a particular marginalised group, such as with a group of women or a group of people with disabilities. This ensures that their voices are represented in the design process. And the rest of the service value test helps to integrate this data into technical design decision making. And this is how we do that. We create service maps which map the services against key decision criteria for the design. This helps us select services that are desirable according to different decision criteria. So these key decision criteria might represent the aim of the project or be representative of end user priorities. We would also recommend that in some way a practical feasibility of implementation is represented in order to ground the direction of the design in what is practically possible. So for example, decision criteria might be ease of delivery, near-term economic benefit for the community, women's preferences, and impact on education quality in the case of school. Now I won't go into detail about how these are calculated, and you need a robust method in order to evaluate each service against them, but there's more details to be found in sources at the end of this talk. So the result is a service map such as this. These service maps map the services according to the criteria and show trade-offs within the decision criteria. For example, perhaps ease of delivery on the x-axis here contradicts in some cases with women's preferences on the y-axis in terms of service placement. These sort of trade-offs need to be highlighted and made clear so they can be dealt with really carefully in the design. So the size of the bubbles here indicate the number of counters that were given to the service during the focus groups. And so this is an indication of popularity. By looking at the top right, where we have what is services that are easier relatively to deliver and which are high in terms of women's preference, this area here, we can see which services are beneficial in terms of both criteria. And here we can see that the veterinary shop is in that place and is also an extremely popular service in terms of what it received in the service value test. So in this way, it helps us to integrate the community needs and aspirations data into the technical design decision making, as we can ensure that we pick services, being careful of these trade-offs and looking at the top right where they're more optimal. Here is another example of a service map, this time for Ngeno Secondary School. This takes the results from the focus groups with the students, both male and female groups, and the teachers, and puts them together onto one map. So for each project, there are multiple service maps because there are different combinations of the decision criteria. So this isn't the only map that we would use to make decisions in terms of what services are suitable for this particular project. So for Ngeno School, here we have mapped on the x-axis, we have improved educational outcomes, and the services are spread along that depending on how much they might improve the educational environment and the attainment of the children. And on the y-axis, we have near-term economic benefit from lower to higher. We can also see more clearly on this map the different colours of the bubbles. The different colours relate to how many focus groups suggested this service. So the red bubbles, for example, enough teachers and dispensary, teachers' laptops and sanitary products, were suggested just by one of the focus groups, whereas those in green came up for all of them. So using the service maps to inform our decision-making about what services the system will support, we then move on to sizing calculations for the system. And this is just for the technical route. So we will be thinking about power requirements for the different appliances that will fulfill those services, and also energy storage requirements that will be necessary, for example, if we're using solar PV to run things throughout the evening, or perhaps in the early morning. We also start thinking about the power utilization profile, when different services will be needed, and this feeds into the calculations about energy storage and also helps to inform our thinking about any control strategy that we might need to prioritize different loads. We'll consider if the system should be DC or AC, and if AC, single phase or three phase, this depending on the loads that we're wanting to run. And the final step of this technical design stream leads into a technical implementation. This is Almoti borehole, where we have put in the PV in the foreground, and you can see in the solar hut here all of the battery bank and the solar control equipment and the load control equipment. On the right here is the water tank, and so the borehole pump is now running off the solar and filling up this water tank, and people are bringing their livestock and bringing their cartons in order to collect water for domestic use. So now, Amasi and Smart Villages are working on new services guided by the service value test results, but also by the community in the form of their advisory committee that's been set up. And we're looking to develop this into kind of a Maasai business hub space. So the second activity that I want to go into a little bit more is another couple of community participation activities. So the first of these is discussions on site selection. The way that we've approached this in sub-village Kiruru is to make a small model of the village. These are these small items here, and to lay them out how they exist in real life. Then community members can come and take the model of the PV and of the solar hub that will have all the control equipment and storage equipment in it, and place these on different areas and have a discussion amongst themselves about where this equipment should go. It's really important that this discussion is inclusive, that everyone is on board with it, because it addresses issues of land ownership and community agreement and buy-in to the system. Obviously, there are technical ramifications for site placement through the impact on the design of electricity transmission and distribution systems. But we found this a really effective way to get the community involved in thinking about where different land boundaries were and where, given what they wanted to do with the electricity, would be best to put the equipment. The second participatory activity I want to touch on is that after we've had focus groups about productive use ideas, we have workshops about business plans. So if community members with business ideas come forward, then we set up workshops to discuss and explore the feasibility of these ideas. The idea is to translate it from an idea into a kind of concrete plan or steps of action. So we discuss things such as what is the size of the market, the cost of the running, what pricing would they set for their product or service, for example, a milling machine, and what do they need to actually get this off the ground. So this, in sub-village Kiruru, is running concurrently to our development of the technical side of the system. The third activity I'm going to talk about is to do with discussions on governance. I'm going to use the example of Engeno School, and which is situated in sub-village Muarak and main village Sekuru. And this is an interesting kind of complex example of local governance because there's 3 levels to engage with. But first, a bit of background about the school situation. So you can see here there's a bit of a distance between the school and the borehole, and the school is reliant on this borehole for their water. On the right here, we see the pipe between the school and the borehole. This here has been mended using rubber tape after it was broken into. The challenge that the school has is that they're reliant on this borehole and they have to buy diesel for it, which they struggle to afford. Now, because of the borehole, there is no outlet for community water. There's not a community water buying point. People from the surrounding community or people passing through are often in need of water, and so to get it, they try to get into the pipe when the school is using it. This is what results with this sort of damage. Now, to mitigate against this, the school has to disrupt its learning activities, and every 3 days when they need to pump water, one class has to stop learning, go outside, line up along the pipe and guard it while the water is pumped. So this is a really problematic situation, and we wanted to try to rehabilitate this borehole in order to have a community water point, serve the school, and also start thinking about a small community business hub around the borehole. So to pursue this borehole rehabilitation has meant lots of meetings and ongoing discussions and negotiations with the governance structures involved. So here, just on this, even this very local level, there are still 3 governance structures involved in the conversations. The first is the governance structure of the school, so the headmasters and the teachers. The second is governance within sub-village Muarak. And the third is the main village, Sekuru, which, although it's some way away, it actually owns the borehole, which is in sub-village Muarak. In Sekuru, there is a village government, and represented on this is somebody from sub-village Muarak. So we've had a number of meetings and continue to have meetings with the different groups involved to negotiate about what could happen at the borehole, negotiate about how the school could be served and mitigate their challenge with providing enough water for all their pupils and students and teachers. And the aim is to ensure that none of the governance structures will come into conflict and that everything can work together harmoniously to improve water acquisition for Muarak, but also for the school, and also to think about what other services could be useful for both the school but also the villagers living in Muarak. While these discussions are ongoing, we have dived into some preliminary design work. This is just for focusing on the school's needs. So we can estimate demand in terms of hours of use during the day of particular services, and after 5 p.m, for example, as that is when the battery power would be required if we're using solar PV. That information about usage patterns, about when lights might be used, about when studying might be going on in the school, about when teachers might be using projectors or laptops to prepare their lessons, that can all come from the service value test and the focus groups where these issues were discussed, where we asked and discussed about what are the kind of activities that go on at the school and what are their challenges and what is the wider context. So from that information, we can figure out kind of the power, the energy requirements, the size of the solar PV, and the size of the batteries that might be required. We can start also thinking about system configuration. What components do we need that can provide this sort of system? Now, we know very much so that we will be returning to this because at the moment this is just for the school, because that process of talking to the governance bodies is still happening. To try to have a situation where we can move forward together, the school, sub-village Muarak and main village Sekuru. In particular, we want to ensure that any design or any system that is put in also meets the needs of the sub-village Mubarak in which the borehole is situated, because they will be alongside the system, they'll see the system, and it's important to ensure that their needs are not neglected, and to ensure a harmonious situation between the school and the sub-village to make sure that the system is also useful for them and is serving their needs. So before the corona crisis, we were hoping to go back to the Ngeno area and Mubarak to run more community needs and priorities assessments, more service value tests with the people that live in the surrounding area. And when we do manage to do that, when that does happen, this will all feed into the technical designing that we're doing here. We are continuing to learn more and investigate various technical questions, and we have ongoing investigations into some of these. We're investigating the use of variable frequency drives and their compatibility with other equipment. We're currently using them to run water pumps at Ormoti borehole site. We're also investigating using them with other large bits of equipment, such as milling machines. And in terms of milling machines, we're investigating what size milling machine is most appropriate for the systems that we're going to be installing. People are used to the large diesel-powered milling machines, which have very fast throughputs. However, these are often only turned on for a couple of hours a day in very rural areas, such as the ones that these projects are in, because there just isn't a demand for it to be run any more frequently. What this means is if you go and visit one of these machines, you might be waiting for 3 or 4 hours or even 5 hours until they have enough customers to justify turning the machine on. These machines obviously also take a great deal of power, and so we're looking at whether smaller machines would be suitable and would work with our systems. Obviously, a smaller machine will have a lower throughput, so people might have to wait longer from when maize starts to be milled for it to be finished. However, because they run at lower power, it won't be necessary to wait as they do with a diesel engine and turn it on when they have enough customers to justify it. It will be running throughout the day. So we're investigating, and we will be running experiments shortly as to whether or not people would be happy to wait a similar amount of time, or hopefully less time, for a slower machine that is switched on immediately. So there's still lots to discover. So to round up, the Smart Villages approach is about integrating community engagement and participation into the system design process. And by system, we mean technical, governance, and financial. It's about including community services and productive use services, not just focusing on household electrification. And it's often an iterative process to get there. But unfortunately, the story doesn't quite end there, because you also have challenges around the practical implementation, which require a great deal of flexibility and adaptability. There might be challenges with varying availability of parts and equipment. Parts or equipment that have been specified and are into the technical design that were available might suddenly not be available, and you find yourself having to do a quick redesign to make sure that you can still move forward. There can be delays in import and acquisition of parts, and there can still be issues with appropriateness of kit as the design team learn alongside the community what works and what doesn't. So that brings us to the end of this short presentation. Thank you very much for listening. For more information on smart villages, do check out our website. And for more information on the service value test, there's a publication, and the link to that is also on this slide. Thank you.